So my question, sort of related to that, is if we legalize all drugs tomorrow, we just repeal all the laws, and here we go. Do you know what will happen? And if you don't, then what makes you think that just repealing them all, the costs of that will outweigh the benefits, if there are any benefits?
Well, surely you have to admit that it is a cost that at least 500,000 people who are in jail, whose primary and most heinous offense is drug possession. So alleviating that cost would be huge in my mind. Secondly, we know that, for instance, Portugal used to have the highest rate of heroin overdose in the EU, and then they decriminalized the use of all drugs, which isn't full legalization, but it is a step away from full legality, and they had a huge drop in the amount of overdose deaths. Some studies said that they actually had a lowering of the use of heroin too, and some other studies seem to indicate that the use stayed the same. But if what we're really worried about is people dying, then it would seem like we have at least some evidence that making drugs not illegal reduces overdose deaths. So, I'm here going to outline two bad arguments that we often hear for drug prohibition. I'm going to explain why these arguments don't work and what exactly I think is wrong with them. Then I'm going to outline what I claim is a good argument against drug prohibition. Then Levi will talk, and since I'm going first, he's probably going to skillfully avoid all the traps I'm trying to set for him, but of course, I hope he will be able to do so. So here's one argument we usually see from prohibitionists. Drug use is very harmful to users. The government should prohibit people from doing things that harm themselves, and therefore the government should prohibit drug use. Now, you'll notice that second premise, the government should prohibit people from doing things that harm themselves, it's doing all the work in this argument. And there are big problems with it. Riding motorcycles, skydiving, again, moving to Florida, maybe even something like agreeing to publicly argue for complete drug legalization. All of these things might turn out to harm you in some way or be imprudent. But they aren't the kinds of things that the government should prohibit you from doing. Is it right for the government to prohibit you from staying with a boyfriend or girlfriend that's emotionally abusive? Is it right for the government to prohibit you from cheating on a boyfriend or girlfriend? So, here's another argument that you will often get from prohibitionists, which is that drug use harms people other than drug users. They'll say things like, but it isn't just drug users who get harmed. Drug use harms people's families. And they say, since drug use harms people other than users, the government should prohibit people from doing things that harm others. Therefore, the government should prohibit drug use. The problem with this argument is either the first premise or the second premise. Does drug use harm people other than the users? Sure, it does. You can become addicted to a drug and break into somebody's house and burglarize them. Or you can get addicted to drugs and you can start being a jerk to your friends and family. You can stop calling your mother. You can drop out of school. You can take dead-end menial jobs and just kind of drift from place to place. In both those cases, you're hurting people that are other than yourselves. Now, the problem is that if the harm in question is like breaking into somebody else's house and burglarizing them, we have laws against that. And so that's already illegal. You can already be held accountable for that. So let's talk about the second case, because this gets brought up a lot by people who say, well, drug use can ruin families, and surely it can. But I can wake up tomorrow and decide not to call my mother. I can quit this job. I can start living a drifter's life and, move all around and take dead-end jobs. It's not illegal for me to do that. It's not illegal for me to turn myself into a loser. And if it's not illegal, and it shouldn't be the state's responsibility from permitting me to voluntarily turn myself into a loser for sure, then the state should not be permitted to forbid me from taking a substance which only has a slight chance of turning me into a loser. So, those are two arguments that you usually hear for drug prohibition. Here's an argument against drug prohibition. And both those arguments and the argument that I'm about to give here are taken from the philosopher Michael Huemer. So, just fair warning, these aren't my own. So, the drug war is unjust because we are actually punishing people for exercising their rights. Philosopher Doug Husak, who's another philosopher, has argued that drug prohibition is the greatest injustice perpetuated by the United States since slavery. That's not a hyperbole. In 2006, there were 500,000 people in prisons and jails whose most serious offense was a drug offense. In addition to punishing people for exercising their rights, if you own your body, then when you are taking a drug, you are exercising the right to the control and use of your body. So, I'm saying, that's right, you have a natural right to use drugs. You might have a responsibility not to, but if you own your body, you have a right to use it as you choose. On this view, you have a right to the use of the control and use of your body. If it seems like you have any rights at all, you have this right. And this right explains a lot of common sense morality. It explains why rape, kidnapping, and battery are wrong. Why we don't think you should be used in medical experiments against your will. This actually even explains both sides of the abortion debate pretty well. Pro-choicers think that a woman has a right to do whatever she wants to her body, while pro-lifers think that the fetus is a person, and the woman therefore does not have the right to control what happens to the body of the fetus. So the argument formally works like this. You have a right to the control and use of your body, in the manner that you have the right to control of your other property. Drug use is, for reasons described above, a legitimate exercise of the control and use of your body. The state has no business prohibiting you from exercising a legitimate use of your body, and therefore the state has no business prohibiting any drug use. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to kind of get back to something I started saying at the beginning, which was this issue of no second chances. And I want to reiterate that the means of enforcing a law are not the same thing as whether or not the law should exist. So I'm not sure that many of you remember this time, but in the mid-1990s, no highways in the US allowed people to drive faster than 55 miles an hour. And now, it's 85 in some places, somewhere in between, right? And the issue is that of those 40,000 deaths per year on the road, thousands of them can be attributed to the fact that you're allowed to drive faster than 55 miles an hour. So can you imagine now, 25 years later, we're going to reimpose a 55 mile an hour speed limit on the highway? Nobody would sit for it, right? Even though it would save thousands of lives. So I think this is very important for us to think about, because if we reduce our control over people's behavior in some areas, then we can have highly negative consequences that we don't foresee beforehand, right? So somebody might have said, hey, we can't let speed limits go up above 55. This is crazy, right? But obviously, the voices that said, it's no big deal, won, right? And slowly, speed limits crept up. And so every one of those people that died because people were driving too fast, this is their own body, right? It's my own body, it's my own car. Why can't I drive as fast as I want, right? Why can't you reduce the restrictions on me, right? So this fits perfectly within the framework that we're offered, but we can see that maybe the consequences of it, we couldn't foresee them, right? We were sort of looking through foggy glasses, right? And we don't get a second chance. We can't reimpose a 55 mile an hour speed limit. for all those people who are genetically predisposed to schizophrenia, they certainly don't need any help in how bad their life is going to get, right? So they don't need someone telling them that it's no big deal to use a substance that is certainly going to hurt them. Now, I'll stipulate it's a small group of people, but we don't know who those people are ahead of time. And if we allow everyone access to this substance, then certainly kids are going to get it more often, right? We saw this with cigarettes, right? You have to be 16 to smoke cigarettes. Well, I mean, before it became uncool to smoke cigarettes, right? People would smoke them when they were 14 whenever they wanted, right? Because they're easily available. This issue of harm is also kind of interesting because, sure, you have the right to turn yourself into a loser, but that doesn't mean that there aren't means for the rest of us, and potentially the government, to try to help you not become a loser and, give up on your family, right? Maybe your desire to quit your job and all that stuff is because you're depressed, right? And so maybe we need to provide some kind of assistance to help you not be so depressed, right? So that's just one means of dealing with one potential condition that might turn you into a loser and ruin your family. But in the case of drugs, it's potentially the case that just helping you isn't enough. That we also need to, on the front end, restrain that behavior, decrease the supply, and increase the cost of usage. And this goes back to the Portugal example. It was decriminalized. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is they made possession of it, of any drug, basically like getting a speeding ticket or parking in the wrong spot. Right? So there was still a cost attached to using it and getting caught, but they weren't going to put you in jail for it. Right? And on the other side, on the supply side of that market, the laws are still in place. It's still illegal for you to traffic drugs and all that sort of thing. If you have large quantities of drugs, you are not allowed to move them around. So there's still a supply restriction in place, even with something like decriminalization. So I guess what I'm advocating for is just exercising a bit of wisdom that you might not really know what might happen if we repeal all laws against the use of dangerous substances. It's very hard to know what could happen. Sure, there are problems with the way this law is enforced, but legalizing them all is sort of like killing a fly with a sledgehammer. There might be more reasonable means of dealing with the problem of police abuse, et cetera, which are separate issues. And I'll yield the rest of my time to Ms. Dawes.
Okay, so now we're into audience Q&A.
Okay, so I'm going to have you guys share a mic. And then let me take this mic stand. So if you guys have a question, I would like to come up, and I'd like Jacob Caudill to come up here. Jacob Caudill is this year, our undergraduate scholar that got a scholarship for the Gorky Institute, and he is modeling the shirts that come to my hand. You can check out the back, it's pretty awesome. So who's got a question for either one of these two to pose? Come on up to the microphone. We need you up here. Here's a little shirt for your trouble.
If you want to ask a question,
so people with questions, make a line now. This one. Go ahead. All right, quiet down.
When the speed limit was raised from 55 miles per hour to whatever it is now, do you have proof that the death toll was increased?
Yeah, the study that I read basically said that we're going to look at the same highways and control for the amount of traffic, right? Because maybe more traffic means more fatalities, right? So we're going to control for the amount of traffic on those roads, the width of the roads, how big the shoulder is, and all of that sort of thing. So it's, I would say, a fairly sophisticated econometric type study that controlled for everything that at least we could have any, at least we think might also have increased deaths. But when that law was passed to increase those speed limits, we had more deaths.
Can you list the source of your study, please?
I can't. But I'll get it to you later. Hit me up in class.
Justin, any comment?
Just for the record, I can't list any of my sources now either, so that shouldn't
All right, next question here. Hey, take the shirt. There we go. Anybody else? Yeah, get behind the next person. You guys can make a line of 3 or 4 people, whatever. Go for it.
Are there like any economic benefits like tax, like is there gonna be like a certain tax on the legalization of drugs like there is with the states that legalize marijuana? Or is it just gonna be like street drugs like they are now?
So is this question for me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know, because believe it or not, nobody has put me in charge of this. So I don't have a roll-up, but